So it's your, I talked to a lot of former officers and NCOs who didn't do, 20 years like I did. They only did 2 or 4 or 6 years. But the Army and the 75th had a profound impact on their life that they didn't really realize until they were gone. And you've been gone now for, I guess we talked almost 5 years, which is crazy. What impact did it have on you or stuff? Do you still reflect on that time or use any of your lessons learned or anything that you spent with the Army or the 75th?
Yeah. Well, it's has and continues to have a profound impact on me in an ongoing way. I mean, in the most kind of basic of ways, my close friends who weren't in 75th, they give me a hard time because I often am wearing 75th apparel or I have like a sticker on my car.
Yeah.
It's like, so it's like it's definitely something I've taken with me. But I think a few things that really stick out. One is just an enduring source of pride and confidence. When I'm facing tough things in the private, in my consulting job or other, where it's not clear answer or it's difficult. Just the pride of knowing, I was not too long ago among, some of those elite soldiers in the world. I can figure this out. And just that endurance of pride and confidence has been something that's helped me a lot. Resilience, the ability to face. It's not easy, obviously, being in the regiment. Like, you're constantly challenged, and as you're saying, expected to maintain high degree of performance every day. That the ability to face down, disappointments and stuff has been, something I harken back to my time in regiment, being thrown into all these different jobs that I wasn't always fully prepared for.
Right.
And then finally, just the network. And what I love about this is true of the Army and just being a veteran more broadly, but especially with the regiment, is this ongoing sort of brotherhood that sticks with you through life, and to the point that I'm still, Rangers I served with who want to come to McKinsey, I'm talking to them. When I joined, McKinsey, finding other Rangers who would give me advice and mentorship. It just feels like, and there's just this like instant bond. And you don't lose that when you take off the uniform. You're always part of that, and that's a really special thing to have.
Welcome to the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. I'm your host, Yuma Barnett, and I've got a very special guest here today. And I always say it's very special, but this one's truly special because we got to work together. He was a former platoon leader of mine when I was a company first sergeant at 3rd Ranger Battalion. Chris Higgins. Talk about he's just a smart guy. He's one of those PLs that you had around. You're like, I don't know, go run it by Chris. Or if you're writing a paper for college, you go run it by Chris. Cause he was just, he came from Harvard to the Army, which we're going to get into that story a little bit. But you could always just count on him to be a very analytical thinker on some of the things that we did in the Ranger Regiment. And Chris always gave us, everybody, didn't matter who it was, direct and honest feedback, which is something we really appreciated. And I'm glad he takes some time here from San Francisco, which is a great day to be a San Francisco 49er fan out there as we welcome in the Cowboys this week. But I'm going to pass it off to you, Chris, and let you introduce yourself, and we'll get on with the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Yuma. Really kind introduction. I'll have a lot of fond memories of D Company, and just our time together is really special, and I love serving with you. Chris Higgins, born and raised in New York, Long Island specifically, about an hour from the city. Grew up a Giants fan, so I've actually disliked the Cowboys for a long time.
Yeah, that's right.
So now it's a Niners fan.
It's a natural transition.
Yeah, very easy.
Yeah.
Very easy. Yeah. So grew up in Long Island. Army was the furthest, I think, the first 10, 12 years of my life. Joining the Army wasn't really on my radar screen. I didn't come from a military family or anything like that. Very typical, I think, North Shore, Long Island, upper middle class, kind of, nice neighborhood, sort of things like that. Very, very privileged upbringing. But then, 9/11 happened, and that had a transformative impact on me. I think a lot of people who were around my age, I was like 7th grade, 8th grade at the time, really changed my outlook. Was going to go to West Point, got accepted there and was pretty excited about it. But then I also got into Harvard at the same time. And again, knew nothing about military careers. There weren't, I think, any seniors in the classes before me from where I went to high school had gone into the military, so I have very little models. But I heard of this thing called ROTC, like, oh, that's another way to join the military and get a college degree. And I had a mentor who talked me out of going to West Point. Said, "Hey, you should go to Harvard instead and do ROTC. It'll be better for you." So I did that. College ROTC, commissioned out of Harvard, the MIT ROTC battalion. And then I spent a couple of years doing post college, like graduate studies, a couple of fellowships. I spent a year in China as a Fulbright scholar, supported by the State Department, which is great. It was fun. I got to live in Guangzhou near Hong Kong for a year and just didn't have a lot of responsibilities. I was auditing classes, but basically I was just hanging out, studying Chinese and going to karaoke bars with Chinese, college students. So it was fun. And from there, I went and I got an actual master's degree in Cambridge in the UK on a different fellowship, at Gates Cambridge Scholarship, and studied international relations there. And then around 2012 or 13, I finally joined the Army. They had very kindly, paid for my college and waited for me to go gallivant around the world for a couple of years. Went on active duty, did the infantry officer thing. Was stationed out in JBLM for a while as a striker platoon leader, and then was very fortunate to be able to come to regiment and serve there for a couple of years before getting out. Now I'm out here in San Francisco. My wife and 2 kids. I've been a consultant at McKinsey for about 4.5 years now, and I'm leaving now to go work at a defense tech startup in the Bay Area. So
awesome.
Glad to be here.
Awesome stuff. Pretty. I mean, do you speak Mandarin?
I do. It's I'd say I'm pretty rusty now, but I'm learning. I have a 2-year-old who I'm trying to just introduce to the language, and so I'm actually relearning a lot of it.
Yeah.
When I was in my early 20s, I was studying geopolitics and reading Communist Party documents to better understand China's future. And now it's like Chinese version of Wheels on the Bus,
right?
And I'm a little teacup, so
that's a big difference. Yeah, that's quite a journey to active duty there. I would say it's probably unique from a lot of people's experience. And so to set the stage kind of for the conversation and the podcast at large, I'll get right to the question at hand that I ask everybody is what's your definition of vulnerability?
Yeah, I love the question, and I love thinking about it a bit. It's something that, so I would say first off, it's not weakness, which I think is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of that, or I think particularly Army community that we're a part of, or maybe. I think most importantly, I say a couple of things. First, just being your authentic self, and I mean. That term is thrown a lot around. You hear it a lot in the private sector out here, like bring your whole self to work. I never really know what that means, but in my terms, it's just not putting on airs, being yourself, acknowledging, honestly your strengths and weaknesses, where you need to get better. I think it's a lot about just living with integrity and honesty instead of thinking you have to be something else and showing that off, kind of having your armor on. Admitting when you make mistakes and being okay with that, and not trying to put on this air of being perfect. It's something I saw a lot in the Army. Saw bad versions of this, and then even in the private sector too. In McKinsey, it's a lot of people have a lot of imposter syndrome. They feel like they need to be a certain way, and they don't they're not themselves. And it's just a recipe for being miserable. So, that's how I think about vulnerability, and it's been. I think it's helped a lot with also just creating psychological safety on teams. So I was at Google recently, hearing them talk about they have this, psychological safety concept they try to create on their teams. It fosters more creativity. I think that starts with leaders who are vulnerable and honest about who they are.
Yeah, I like what you said there. There's your authentic self, because that's kind of my definition of vulnerability. Well, and I think it's it's one thing to say it, and it's one thing to actually do it, right? It's one thing to practice what you preach and say you're being your authentic self, but it's another thing to do it. And I think we've all seen it probably on both sides, military and other, where they're saying one thing and doing the other. So really owning yourself is, I think, one of the keys of vulnerability, and I couldn't agree more. So I want to know more about how you go from Harvard to the infantry. I mean, I could see Harvard and the intelligence community, or
Sure.
Harvard and engineers, or Harvard and something, but Harvard to the infantry. So, what drew you to the infantry? What drew you to the Army instead of one of the other services? I know you spoke a little bit about 9/11 having an impact there, as
Mhm.
far as probably going to service and serving. But how did that road, Harvard to the infantry, how did that road lead where it did?
Yeah, yes, it's yeah. Thanks for the question. I grew up about an hour from the city in New York, and I remember very distinctly to this day, like in the days after 9/11, getting on the school bus and smelling the smoke
Oh
and being
yeah,
like, asking what is that, and it, there's a very I still remember a lot of details of those kind of days after 9/11. It was very transformative, and I remember my mom was crying a lot. We were watching the news, and I remember seeing like, these guys getting off. I didn't know the night vision goggles. You could
yeah,
see. I don't know. It was 82nd. It might have been Richmond. There was something on CNN playing of guys getting off the back of a C-130 in
yeah,
Afghanistan, and I was like, "Wow, I want to be that one of those guys." Like
yeah.
this in this terrible moment, we're all looking to these guys to make this right. And I knew I was going to join the military after that. And then I think from there, I was then as I went through my high school years, my dad wanted me to be go into business or be a lawyer or something, get a good education. It's like very like Long Island professional
Right.
focus. Um, and so I was going to be an army lawyer. I thought like that might be good combination. I'll get a good education, serve, and all that. But then when I started at Harvard, I think I just quickly kind of I think I chose Army because I respected West Point more than anything else. And that was just how it got me on the Army track. But then once I was doing ROTC, I feel like the Army has a way of obviously it has a very strong culture and a way of indoctrinating you into it. And I kind of being in that culture realized, well, the most competitive, high speed people on my ROTC battalion want to go in the infantry. And the instructors I respect most are infantry officers and infantry NCOs.
Yeah.
They seem to be the fastest, the strong. I mean, I'm being very infantry centric here, so armor people might be a little annoyed, but very
That's okay.
infantry centric. Very the fastest, strongest guys are all and gals are all guys that kind of all want to be infantry officers. So that's kind of where I naturally gravitated towards, and I realized, well, I joined the army to do cool stuff and
Yeah.
not, I can go be a lawyer later. So that's kind of how I gravitated towards the infantry, and I think I gravitated towards infantry over something like armor or aviation would have been cool in and of themselves but I really liked just being with the idea of leading soldiers and being on the ground, not necessarily interacting with being focused on a particular platform or
Right.
machine of some type. Ironically, I went on to be a striker
Right.
PL, which is like I was like, I did not sign up for all this mechanic stuff,
Right.
um, but that's what really kind of drew me to the infantry, is just leading soldiers and being at the tip of the spear.
Yeah, and I think that's what leads a lot of people to the infantry, whether it's Marine Corps infantry, Army infantry, Navy SEAL stuff. It's that, that's partially what you see on TV, right? And it's partially, you're going to be in the mix, right? You're going to be in the mix operationally, and you're going to be in the mix to lead people at a different level. And like you said, hopefully there won't be a vehicle or another platform there. That's the focus that you have to build around. So that, I mean, that's kind of the reason I went to the infantry, right? I just liked the way it seemed, and I had the same experience as the best recruiters I ran into, and the people that I respected that were prior service. Most of them were infantry, and combat arms at some point. So I think that's just where we're drawn to. I think maybe something in our DNA from way back, kind of draws us into that. And I want to get into the Harvard thing a little more, but more on your service. So you went to JBLM, you're with the strikers up there. Did you see some Second Ranger Battalion guys running around the airfield up there, or what led you to the 75th?
Um, yeah, I didn't run into too many 275 guys up there, interact with them much. But I think what drew me to the 75th was just wanting to, I mean, just yeah, obviously the reputation of the organization and wanting to
Right,
be with the best, drew me quite a bit. Also, candidly, wanting to deploy
right,
was my generation of officers. Like I kind of came into at the tail end, and I joined the army to fight in Afghanistan. I didn't join or yeah fight terrorists. I didn't join to just train as much as I had a good experience at JBLM. And so that I think wanting to be the best and wanting to deploy were the two things that drew me to regiment.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's why. And I was very fortunate to be able to go. Just timing's so tricky, and
Yeah, it is.
I was able to get in just getting in the door to RASP. I thought was like the biggest barrier, and
Yeah.
I felt fortunate to be.
Yeah, it can be very challenging for the officers to line up that timeline to get into the regiment. And then not only when you line up the timeline, it's got to be lined up so you can take the jobs that you want in the regiment. You don't get stuck at a regimental position for your 2-year stint because you're going to get promoted out of it or whatnot. So I'd be curious, from your time in the conventional army to your time in the 75th, what was the biggest difference you noticed between the two? Most people say it was the speed at the way the 75th was moving compared to their conventional time. I just wonder if you have the same take or a different perspective.
It was the quality of the NCOs.
Yeah.
Far away. I mean, and not just saying that because you're my former first sergeant.
Checks in the mail, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't mean that. I don't mean to like denigrate the conventional army, because I had some great NCOs in my regular army unit. But there's just much more variance.
Yeah.
Where like I had my first platoon sergeant, had a substance abuse problem, and like didn't show up to work half the time, and that was my first platoon sergeant as an infantry PL. My whole training as a cadet, the one thing the NCOs told me over and over again, my trainers like, hey, just listen to your NCOs, listen to your NCOs, listen to your NCOs. And now I actually tell young officers I'm talking to, like, hey, first job is to evaluate your NCOs, figure out which ones you can trust, then listen to those ones.
Yeah.
Because depending on where you go, it's just going to be a range of quality. Same with the officer side too. It's not just an NCO
absolutely
thing. It's just the what I think obviously sets the regiment apart is just the standards and the ability to hold and uphold those standards. And that just really struck me. I was also fortunate because I was a sniper PL, as you know, and so I had a whole platoon of NCOs, and it was just the easiest. In terms of managing the platoon, it's the easiest job I ever had.
Right.
These were all extremely capable. I mean, the snipers had their own issues, as you know, but like they definitely, people were passing their PT tests and showing up to work.
Yeah.
So that was, I was very impressed by that, and just by also just the and it's, just the core army stuff, but also just the intelligence too. Like they were just smarter than some of them had college degrees, but they were just really sharp. And I don't know what it is. I think like not being in the regiment or from the outside in, you might think of like we watch Black Hawk Down. It kind of portrays the Rangers as these like sort of meathead hard guys on line, but they're actually really intelligent. And like that's where in the special operations world in general, I think is where you find some of the most sharpest officers and NCOs. So that's really what stood apart.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's the same on the officer side, right? There's a selection process for a reason, and the Army's great. In my time in the conventional Army as an instructor and all the conventional units I interacted with, there were some NCOs and officers out there. I said they would absolutely thrive in the 75th. For whatever reason, stuff didn't line up for them to get there. But there's just a different level when everybody's selected. Everybody's job, you got to earn your job every day you walk in the door, and you can be fired and moved to the next unit or kicked out. I think everybody steps up their game, right? And as far as you say, I felt the same way as an NCO, looking at my peer NCOs, going, "Wow, these are some really smart guys and gals, right?" These are, and I think what set us apart, or what I always know, is we were, as a group officer, we were really candid with one another. We didn't mind telling you if we disagreed with a decision or if we thought you were wrong. And I think that cultivated conversation, which in turn cultivated different results and outcomes for whatever you were talking about, instead of sometimes doing stuff in a stovepipe, as you've seen it. And not that it doesn't happen, but that's one of the things I really cherished about the 75th. So how much time did you spend in the 75th?
Just shy of 2 years. I was I actually got stuck at regiment.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We all know what that means. Yeah.
Yeah. I was supposed to go to 175 originally, and then after RASP, I got pulled aside. But actually, then the RXO, the regimental XO, and he was like, I had this new role in RHQ. I really need a smart officer to do. You went to Harvard, so and it ended up being a job. Very very like headquarters. I was like. I was a lieutenant in a headquarters '06 headquarters. So I was it was a lot of PowerPoint. So I was there for a while. I did get to deploy though, and I
Yeah.
was at the jock overseas, and then came back and was able to smooth talk my way into 375, which
Yeah.
was awesome experience.
So it's your, I talked to a lot of former officers and NCOs who didn't do, 20 years like I did. They only did 2 or 4 or 6 years. But the Army and the 75th had a profound impact on their life that they didn't really realize until they were gone. And you've been gone now for, I guess we talked almost 5 years, which is crazy. What impact did it have on you or stuff? Do you still reflect on that time or use any of your lessons learned or anything that you spent with the Army or the 75th?
Yeah. Well, it's has and continues to have a profound impact on me in an ongoing way. I mean, in the most kind of basic of ways, my close friends who weren't in 75th, they give me a hard time because I often am wearing 75th apparel or I have like a sticker on my car.
Yeah.
It's like so it's like it's definitely something I've taken with me. But I think a few things that really stick out. One is just an enduring source of pride
Mhm.
and confidence. When I'm facing tough things in the private, in my consulting job or other, where it's not clear answer or it's difficult. Just the pride of knowing, I was not too long ago among, some of those elite soldiers in the world. I can figure this out. And just that endurance of pride and confidence has been something that's helped me a lot. Resilience, the ability to face. It's not easy, obviously, being in the regiment. Like, you're constantly challenged, and as you're saying, expected to maintain high degree of performance every day. That the ability to face down, disappointments and stuff has been, something I harken back to my time in regiment, being thrown into all these different jobs that I wasn't always fully prepared for.
Right.
And then finally, just the network. And what I love about this is true of the Army and just being a veteran more broadly, but especially with the regiment, is this ongoing sort of brotherhood that sticks with you through life, and to the point that I'm still, Rangers I served with who want to come to McKinsey. I'm talking to them. When I joined, McKinsey, finding other Rangers who would give me advice and mentorship. It just feels like, and there's just this like instant bond. And you don't lose that when you take off the uniform. You're always part of that, and that's a really special thing to have. And yeah, something I'm incredibly grateful for.
Yeah. So of all the time you spent uniform, whether conventional or the 70th, what was your most challenging day in uniform?
Honestly, it's when a couple of our NCOs were wounded. I guess there's 2 different days.
Right.
I think that was hard. I think in part because as the sniper PL, I wasn't with them.
Yeah.
I was sitting in the jock with a completely different job. And it was kind of graded against what I was kind of bred to do as an infantry officer. Like, you're supposed to be there with your guys, and you don't ask them to do anything you want to do. You face, as much, if not more danger than them. And so it's like, damn, these guys are out in very dangerous situations. And just to see them, thankfully, they both ended up being fine and recovered, have done well. But like, it was hard to see them in the hospital at Bath, on a bed, being like, wanting to be with them more, and just not being able to really do anything. So I'm sort of just like a bystander. I feel, that was hard.
Yeah. I agree completely. And I feel, it was rough when we watched them, from the comfort of our jock, right? The weather's fine, the coffee's hot, and we're watching our guys up there from our company. I'm the first sergeant, you're their platoon leader, and we're not able to lead them or get there and render aid or help in any capacity. It's just, it's a helpless feeling, right? You just feel helpless, and all you can do is hope and pray that they're going to be okay, and that you've trained them, right? And for as leaders, hopefully we facilitated the correct training that's going to get them through this moment, right? That's what you really hope, and fortunately, they did, because of who they are, and hopefully some of the training that we were able to facilitate for them. But that was a difficult time sitting there, watching them get hurt and just being helpless, really. And then when you go see them in the hospital, right? I don't know if you felt the same way. I almost felt more helpless because I see them there. They're injured, and it's hard. You don't know what to say exactly, because
Yeah.
you wish you could have been there, but you weren't. And that was a rough, and, I almost forgot that. You went through that together there, sitting in the jock. But on the flip side of that coin, there's a lot of good times in the military. What was your best day in uniform, or something you look back on often and just, get a chuckle or something?
Yeah, I think it was before regiment. It was my first rifle platoon or striker platoon. When I took it over, we were very low performing. I would include myself in that. Like our first exercise was in the summer, and we were so bad. Like the strikers, we couldn't even like like go in a straight line at dark at night. It was so bad. And my company commander was new. Pulled me aside, like, your platoon is the most effed up piece of crap I've ever seen. You could have figured this out, Lieutenant. Like, yes, sir. And then, so I went through a training cycle, focused a lot on the, kind of leaning on the good NCOs, dealing with the ones that were underperforming, and putting people in the right roles, and just really focusing on what we had to do, because we're getting ready for an NTC rotation, big force exercise in Mojave Desert. And 6 months later, we're in the box out in the desert, and we were going up against just an invasion of Russian tanks, or whatever
Right.
the scenario was. And my platoon, it was like we had like maybe less than 20 guys, and like half of them were driving the strikers. We were very small, so we had like 12 dismounts, and we single-handedly, as a platoon, took out an entire company of enemy vehicles with our javelins. And it was the most, it's a training environment, right? It seems like a
Right.
silly little thing. It wasn't,
Right.
no, we didn't, remove any terrorists from the battlefield. But it was so rewarding, especially to see the look on my guys' face. Like, they were so proud of themselves. Because they had gone from being the kind of the I don't know, the ugly duckling in the company and the battalion, to being like, the brigade commander was talking about us. So we had freaking rocked it. And it was, I still look back on that with like a lot of like pride, and it was really, that was the most fun. I mean, and then I learned a lot from that, because I didn't have any exfil plan either. I was just like, hey, let's just run at these guys, and let's just try to kill them with our javelins. It was kind of like, those NPCs that you're kind of set up to lose in the
Oh
NPC,
yeah.
but it was a fun experience.
Yeah. That's awesome. And then, we'll move into your military transition a little bit. That could be a whole podcast in itself, I think. But what I'd like to gain from you is kind of your biggest lessons learned that you learned in your transition as kind of a junior officer, getting out and going into the corporate world. If there's, something that you wish you didn't do, that you wish you had done, or something that you did do in your transition that you think everybody else should know.
Well, I think the first thing to do that I came to appreciate a lot more is to ask for help.
Yeah.
Because I really learned through my transition in my career sense, and just the power of a network, and you actually have more of a network than you think you do. And if you don't, you can go build one. Because especially coming out of the military, especially coming out of the Ranger Regiment, people want to help you.
Yeah.
And even especially if it's former other Rangers or veterans, there's just like a desire to help, because people feel good helping people. I make a point now, if anyone reaches out to me on LinkedIn, especially if they're a veteran, I always try to help if there's anything I can do. And so just don't be afraid to do that. I'll kind of leave your ego at the door, and just go ask for help. And so I did a lot of that. Because I actually had an interesting, I guess, somewhat unusual transition. I didn't want to go to business school as a common route to. I already had a graduate degree. I didn't have GI Bill money, because I'd done ROTC, and I knew I had to be in one city because of my wife's career. So I didn't have a lot of options for where to go. So I didn't want to do business school. I wanted to go straight to consulting, which is hard to do. It's typically, you only go through business school. And so I had to lean on my network, and find a way to get my resume in front of the right people. So leaning on your network and asking for help would be the first thing. The second would be to know what you can and what you're good at, and and know what you don't know. So like, you as a Army leader coming out, you have a natural a leg up on most of the people who weren't in any kind of service, when it comes to just poor leadership skills, and more importantly than that, just an EQ, or just your emotional, social skills, and your ability to like work through conflict. Because you're not usually coming at it as a junior officer, you're not going to walk straight into like a managing a team. It
Right.
depends on the role you're doing, but it's like I came in as an individual contributor to McKinsey, and almost everyone does. And so it's more about it's less about saying, oh, I managed, I see a lot of resumes, people say, oh, I managed $100 million of equipment and 90 soldiers. And it's like, well, we're not evaluating, you're not going to take over one of our business divisions
Right.
as your first job. You're going to be an analyst or an associate. And so then it's like, okay, think about times when you had to convince the commander to see things your point of view, or where you had to get a team that wasn't used to working together to function, through your influence, not through like a command authority. So that's I think this. So know that, and then know what you don't know. Like you're not don't I would say don't like pretend to like you're going to be an expert in business off. You have to like learn over time and like kind of approach it with that like learning mindset. And don't expect your skills to translate one to one, because they won't, and that's
Right.
fine. You have the raw material, and a lot of employers, especially the place like McKinsey, are going to hire you for potential, not for what you can do on day one. And so look for that too. Like look
Right.
for employers that are going to hire you for potential, not because you can,
Yeah.
deliver revenue on day one.
Right. I think that's extremely useful advice, especially the network piece.
Mhm.
Uh, I agree. We don't know the size of our network necessarily, but there's definitely one out there. And I always tell transitioning service members, no matter what field they want to go into, is LinkedIn's a powerful thing. You can search by veteran, go out there and find somebody
Mhm.
who's been what you've been through, and you're going to be more
Mhm.
likely to get a connection and get some advice. And then, the second, third order connection from there. But I don't think we can emphasize enough the power of your network and reaching out and asking for help, whether it's help on your own mental health and your own struggles in your transition, or help, to find the next, your next phase of life. The network is everything. I couldn't agree more. And I'd like to go back
Mhm.
to the education a little bit, because a lot of JOs, NCOs now, with phalanx, they're getting out and going and getting MBAs and going, getting their master's degrees in leadership or whatever. Uh, I always like to hear, somebody, you went to Harvard, but I know there's a lot of service members who don't think that that's in their DNA, right? They don't think they would fit in there. They don't think it's their kind of people. They don't think they'd be accepted, because they came from a blue collar family before they joined the military,
Mhm.
and they are in the military. But everybody I've talked to that's in Tuck, Tuck Next Step, or Harvard getting an MBA, or Columbia or Emory, they are very welcoming to the veteran mindset, to veteran
Mhm.
culture, to veteran feedback. And I just wonder what your advice or what your thoughts are if a veteran out there is scared, officer or NCO, or has some fear about applying for one of these elite level master's degree programs, MBA or leadership or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I would say definitely go for it and don't be scared. Certainly, I mean, I think there's maybe a little bit of a difference between um, maybe we'll separate out like Harvard College to go get an undergraduate degree versus like an MBA. Because in the MBA world, it is very common for veterans to go. I feel
Yeah.
like that's a tried and true path. And so, and certainly at elite schools. And so, I know so many colleagues of mine at McKinsey who, veterans who went through an MBA. So they know what to look for, and that's certainly you will fit in, because an MBA too. I mean, I didn't do one, but everyone I know who's done one will tell you it's not about the academics; it's about
Right.
the network.
Yes.
You don't you I promise you, if you have any kind of college degree, frankly, if you didn't have a college degree, but if you have a college degree and work experience, especially Army work experience and a leadership role, especially, you will be far and ahead of your peers in an MBA who don't have that kind of experience.
Right.
Like I know that also from our recruiting work at McKinsey, we consistently our veteran recruits do so well on the sort of team, the soft skills, the sort of can you manage people, work with people element of it, and that's the stuff that's really hard to teach. Like I can teach you Excel modeling, how to make a PowerPoint slide, how to think about valuing a company. All that stuff is like you can learn that, and you will learn it on the job. It's much harder to teach you to be, an empathetic leader if
Right.
that's not already in your DNA, or how to work, in the face of adversity or when things get stressful, not to freak out, to stay calm. If your client's screaming at you, don't freak out, just stay calm. That's hard to teach.
Right.
And so I'd much rather have a veteran who doesn't know how to, what's different, what's the difference between Excel and PowerPoint. I'd much rather deal with that than deal with someone who's like, whether it's a cocky
Right.
Wharton grad who thinks they know everything, but they get punched in the face, so to speak,
Yeah.
metaphorically speaking, and then don't know how to handle it. So I think you absolutely belong in NBA. Now, I think I have talked to some Rangers on the illicit side who are maybe don't have college degrees, and applying to Harvard and undergrad. I think that's less common.
Yeah. Yep.
So you're not have as much of like a clear path to follow, or like you're not probably. I would imagine. I'm just thinking back to my undergrad days as an 18-year-old. I know of any. I know actually one veteran who was in RTC with me, who was older, and so that probably will be culturally different because they're going to be surrounded by kids who are much younger than you, have nothing approaching your kind of level of life experience. But you should be confident you have first of all I would all things being equal, Harvard would want that,
Right.
Because institutions like Harvard really pride themselves on creating diverse classes. They don't want a bunch of privileged white kids from the North Shore of Long Island
Right.
whose parents make a lot of money, went to fancy private schools. They don't want a class of that because that doesn't do anything for them. That's not exciting for them. They want a diverse class by all metrics, obviously ethnically, racially, every dimension you could think of, but it includes like socioeconomic backgrounds and life experience backgrounds. So, if you can meet the bar academically which I think Rangers should sell themselves short in particular, because I think they're smarter than most. And then Harvard would love to find a way, I would think, can't speak for the institution, they would love to find a way to bring you in. So you would add so much richness to that.
Yeah.
Now, when you get there, you have to figure out, how do I get along with, 18 to 20-year-olds who've never, I think that's probably harder, right? So you might end up hanging out with B school people, business school guys or gals, and, but you wouldn't be the only one either, right? There's, especially, nowadays, I think more and more veterans are doing that. So, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing I see when I talk to veterans, Rangers, whoever it is that's thinking about going into either undergrad education at a Ivy League level or even graduate level, is I just don't self-select. Don't talk yourself into not applying. You reach out to guys like you and the other people that have already been to those schools, the Emorys and the Harvards, and just talk to you guys, because like you said, you're open to have a conversation to help people unlock that greatest potential that they have in them. And I just hate to see what the benefits they can get from the military. If they even have a small itch to do something like that, scratch it a little. Don't self-select out and think you can't do it because you're not qualified, as it was what I tell them. Because like you said, the military there's some amazing people, in the military, in the 75th, and we do have a unique skill set, as in we've been told that you probably didn't know a hell lot about strikers when they gave you that striker platoon, but you had to learn a lot about it. And I mean, and then you didn't know a whole lot about being in a 75th 3-shot, but you had to learn. So you get thrown into a lot of situations in the military where you just have to do on the job training. And I think that prepares people very well, more than they realize, for either corporate world or education on the other side. What do you think about that?
That's such a good point, I couldn't agree more. Like it's the capacity to learn. So whether that's entry level at Harvard freshman year writing class, or like your first day at McKinsey figuring out how to do an Excel model, like that's not that different than having to learn how to maintain a striker or how to do targeting in overseas. I mean, that's an example. Like, I didn't get trained on how to do that as a young officer. I was just thrown into a job and like, okay, target now. What do these drones even do? And so it's your capacity to learn and not be intimidated by it, and just the character you build as in the military is something that average 18-year-old is just not going to have. And so I wouldn't I think education and learning is a lot about focus and trying hard. It's not like some natural gift you're born with and you never have no capacity. If you want to do it, you can figure it out.
Absolutely. And you transitioned out of service into one of the more it's the consulting space, right? And not a small firm behind somebody's garage. You went to one of the big ones
Right.
in McKinsey and Company. Um, a lot of Rangers, a lot of transition stuff. You always see the Deloittes and some of the other bigger consulting companies. They're sponsoring a transition event or hosting a web seminar for veterans. And a lot of Rangers are curious about consulting because they've been told it's very similar to their military career and in some aspects, there's in work culture. Um, Now that you've been in it for 4 years, I guess 4 or 5 years with
Mhm.
McKinsey,
Yeah.
what what's your definition of consulting?
Yeah, I mean, on the most basic level, it's just to give advice,
Right.
right? So you could be a wedding consultant, right? Or what I do is specifically management consulting, and so that's giving advice to the managers of corporations or government entities, sometimes nonprofits, around how to a whole range of topics. It could be from improving their operational efficiency, so like cutting costs. It could be improving how they think about where to grow, where to expand with new lines of business, how to handle their own culture, internal performance issues with their talent, any number of things. So broad corporate strategy, and so it's just at most basic level, it's advising
Yeah.
leaders on how to deal with often very tricky, especially what McKinsey deals with, like ambiguous problems where there's
Yeah.
not like a clear answer. It's that's where we come in and do really well with like unstructured problems. We bring structure to it, and then we help find the right experts to answer, the discrete parts of that problem
Right.
that we've broken down, and then help them go, hopefully help the clients then go implement it.
Yeah. So on a very basic level, would you compare consulting kind of being that OC on a live fire? You come in, you observe, and
Sure.
you offer different perspectives that the people that are in it all the time every day might not have seen from their
Yeah,
foxhole.
that I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think that's actually a really good way of a good way of thinking about it because another so I think the in terms of the value that a consulting firm can bring a good consulting firm can bring to a client. So one is just objectivity and just
Yeah.
being removed. So you don't have skin in the game. So like an OC, you're just observing. You're not a part of the unit. Um, and another is just expertise. And
Yeah.
part of that expertise comes from having seen the same problem in different units over
Yes.
and over again. So I actually think OC is a very good example because you have all these units coming into similar situations. Like when a company would comes to us with like, hey, we need to cut costs. Well, not the first company that's need to cut costs because of macroeconomic trends or whatever. So we've seen that before. We have playbooks, and yeah, I do a lot of work in McKinsey. I did most of my work in government, and what's been interesting from that is, you know, government agencies can be very siloed, and it's almost like I heard someone describe it once as being at a big ball at a big party and being on a balcony. You kind of see what all the different people dancing, where they're bumping into each other and where they should go.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that being a consultant. You're a little removed. You might work at DoD and Treasury or different. You might
Yeah.
work in Army and Navy, and you kind of see, oh, you're all trying to do the same thing. You see that a lot of times we just connect people. Hey, we
Yeah.
should talk to each other.
Yeah.
Um, and so that objectivity and remove, I think,
Yeah.
is a lot of what consulting does.
And I think we kind of touched on it earlier when our two Rangers got wounded overseas. We're kind of the as leaders in a Delta company, which is different. As a PL and a first, you're kind of a consultant there. You're not necessarily the
Mhm.
subject matter expert at X, but you have a 10,000-foot view, and you hopefully can put things in line to meet their goals or training requirements and stuff that they might not see from behind the scope. So I think military wise, regiment soft specifically, there's a lot more correlation in the consulting world. I've never done it than we realize. I just start realizing it the more of these conversations I have with folks like you is that uh, it's not a bad space for you to go into because you're kind of used to solving complex problems and not panicking about it, as what we do in there. So, what's a good fit though, personality wise, to go into if they want to go in the consulting firm, if they're thinking I want to do this, but I don't know if I would fit or if it's for me.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we certainly accept all personality types is a little bit of an aside, but one kind of quirky thing about McKinsey is we're actually obsessed with the Myers Briggs. If you ever seen that, it's like,
Oh
are you
yeah.
an extrovert, introvert, all
Yep.
that. So if you talk to McKinsey people, anyone, they'll all tell you what their Myers perfects are, like
Yeah.
ISFJ.
Yeah.
And so all types can thrive. I think I think a couple things if you're thinking about it as a veteran. One is, we are uh, deeply analytical, and so you want to be able to. And that doesn't mean like you're good at math or anything. Just like, do you like taking a problem, and
Yeah.
maybe it's how do I get, with X amount of resources, how do I get 28 snipers prepared to deploy, in a new environment where they've never been before. Say it's like going to a different. It's not just going back to Afghanistan for the 20th time. It's going to a different country or something. How do I deal with that? Like, okay, I got to figure out what questions do I need to answer. What is this AO going to be like? What does the enemy posture look like? What weapon systems going to make most sense? Okay, and then from there, I'll work backwards to say, here's the amount of training out there. It's a very structured, analytical way of approaching a problem.
Yeah.
That's what we test for in our interview process more than anything else, is that ability to do that. So I think that's one. I think two is you got to like working with teams, small teams, in a very kind of close knit, collaborative environment. We spend a lot of our time in what are called problem solving sessions, just talking through a problem together and, doing some analysis, but then bringing it back and working as a team. So you got to kind of like that. It's not really one for like people who like to do individual stuff, which should, wouldn't apply to, I think, a lot of veterans. And then I think having a real like service mindset, ultimately we are serving clients. And so we're working through others. So what's different for consulting versus other roles of business is you're not going to be like, it's almost like the military equivalent of always being on staff. You're never going to be the commander or the, sergeant major. You're going to be the S2, S3, S4 advising the boss on what decision to make. And so you got to kind of like that sort of mentality of you're not going to always get to make the decision. You're almost never going to make the decision. You're just going to be advising and answering questions and, dealing with maybe if you don't like if your boss is irrational, makes dumb decisions, you kind of stuck with it. So that's and that's also often why people leave. Consulting is kind of partly why I am, because I've learned a lot. I really love it, but I want to go be the operator. I want to eventually be the boss myself.
Right.
But as long as you're comfortable doing that for a little bit, it's a great place to learn.
Yeah. So I think if you didn't know we were talking about consulting here, I think you just described the life of a Ranger platoon strike force in Afghanistan, right? Hey, get in. I need you to go into Nangarhar.
Right.
That's a big thing that you have to break down into smaller problems. And how do I get fuel? How do I get the helicopters in? How do I offset?
Exactly.
So like I said, there's just so many similarities in the two worlds. I think that people sometimes don't realize, because they, frankly, a lot of people that are in the military have a very deep understanding of consulting, and what those companies do and how they do it. But if you would give anybody some advice that's 2 years out or about to finish their MBA or something and thinking about wanting to go into the consulting field, would you give them any advice before they pursue it?
Yeah, I mean, first it's kind of obvious, but I would talk to veterans who are in, right now, and I can say I'm sure other firms are similar, but for McKinsey, we have a very strong veteran network. We have like a few hundred now, and it's been the awesome part of being in McKinsey. It's just because people really, the veteran network, it's almost like a little veteran mafia. Like everyone takes care of each other and looks out for one another. And we're the same way with external folks. So go ask, talk to people who are there at the firm, and particularly at the firm you're thinking about going to, because culture is going to be different at different ones. So get to understand it if you're going to like it and what it's about. There are some very tactical things I would do where if you want to go to McKinsey, for example. Where I find our veterans applicants tend to fall down is on the case portion of it. There's a case interview portion where you basically get given a business problem, like, hey, this company's losing money. How would you approach it? You have to. What we're looking for is, can you, similar to the going to Nangarhar example, can you break down this problem in a structured way and show us how you would logically pursue the different components in an efficient but thoughtful way? And veterans tend to do very well on the other part of the interview process is around we call it PI, personal experience interview, but more like behavioral type questions, tell me about a time you had to lead
Yeah.
in a difficult situation. We tend to knock those out of the park. But the case is where people under prepare, and just treat it like getting you ready for the RPAT. Like treat it like, okay, there are these different skills I have to be able to do. Like when I was playing to freshman, I used to suck at climbing ropes. So I would just I was playing, I would just go practice climbing rope every day, right? And then eventually it's not that hard to practice. So um, you got to do that in prepping for consulting. And there are a lot of resources out there you can use for it, but just prepare so you don't fall down in the interview process.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And then, the last question I have about the consulting is kind of about some of the, the thoughts that people have about it, or some of the misnomers about it is, the work-life balance is terrible. Get on a plane on Tuesday, come back on Friday. You're not at home. They squeeze as much out of you as they can. What's your experience like work-life balance wise in the consulting field?
yeah. Well, I guess I can be the counter to that myth because I have in like 4.5 years at McKinsey. Now the pandemic obviously threw
Right.
a bit of a wrench in it, but I've traveled less than 6 months
Right.
in the total, in 4.5 years. I would say probably less than 4 months even. Um, and so my first, let's just like leave the pandemic aside because I was like remote work, obviously. But like in my first couple of years, most of my work was here in San Francisco with local software clients and pharmaceutical clients. So I was home every night. And my first travel study was to Colorado, and I did that for 2 months. And then I went back to staying in San Francisco. So the majority of my time, I was not traveling here. And I think I'm probably a little bit of an outlier. I deliberately solved for that. Like I got out of the army to be with my wife. I didn't
Right.
want to travel. But I would say it's very, very possible. In McKinsey, we have this phrase we use is make your own McKinsey. So you can almost think of being at McKinsey as like, think of the firm as a platform for what you want to do with your career. And if one of the things you want to solve for is being home, you can solve for that. Now, it might mean that you don't get to work in the industry of your choice
Right.
or with the people you want to work with. There's some trade off, but I don't think it's true that first that they have to travel. Now, depends, right? If you really, you can be in different cities, it'd be a little bit different story. Like you're in, let's say you're in, it's like say you live in New York and you really want to do like government work, probably going to go to DC a lot,
Yeah.
right? Or, but if you're in San Francisco, you want to do a lot of car work, you're going to go to Detroit, obviously. So, but it's very flexible. I think in terms of work-life balance, that's definitely something we don't have a great I think consulting in general doesn't have a great reputation for, but I just observed it getting a lot better. And because there's a real focus and attention, it's definitely at McKinsey around creating sustainable work-life balance for a number of reasons. I think first we find that people are more effective. Like our own
Yeah.
research shows that
Yeah.
we have better work-life balance. You're happy, you perform better at work. So it's not a great outcome to have a bunch of burned out consultants. You make more mistakes.
Right.
It's not good. And you will be out more, right? People burn out and they go on short-term medical leave for mental health issues. Like, that's not good from a business perspective, right? We want people to take care of themselves, but like, can you avoid that by creating a more work-life balance? And then it's key for retention too, obviously. And so I would say my guess would be the work-life balance is much better than people might think. And but it also comes down to like what you want to get out of it. Like if you really want to make partner in 4 years, you
Right.
probably have to work a little bit harder than like. But like, in my case, like I was out on parental leave. I've had this job I'm about to go to. I'm expecting to work a lot longer hours than I have at McKinsey.
Right.
Being a startup. So I think a lot of times the bad work-life balance is self-imposed. Like people
Yeah.
are a little like insecure overachievers, and they work to 2 in the morning because they want to get something just perfect, and they need to learn like what you should do is like work till 9, and then in the morning talk to your boss about what you did, and like you'll just save yourself a lot of time.
Right.
Unnecessary. I did a lot of unnecessary suffering my first year at McKinsey. I look back on it, it was just like I could have just like asked for help sooner and
Right.
it would have been fine. I just wasted a bunch of time trying to figure out an Excel formula by myself.
Right.
Um, So
Yeah. And I think, the biggest thing I want to get, around this consulting piece and talking about it is the same thing with education is if you're interested, don't self-select out because you think it's going to be long hours and you think you're going to have to travel all the time. Have the build, talk to your network and get the ground's truth. And in it, because I think consulting is, if your opinion, I think it's a great place to learn some really good business experience, and then if you transition out of it, you can be more prepared for more stuff in different capacities in the business sector. So to kind of bring it in and land the plane here, the last question I always ask is if you could go all the way back and talk to Lieutenant Higgins, what advice would you give him?
oh man. One thing I would tell Lieutenant Higgins is to, remember that your soldiers are people, families. Because I think as a lieutenant, I didn't have a family as a, lieutenant. I did not appreciate early on that, like, the most important thing in my soldiers' lives was not training and performing well as a platoon. It
Right.
was their wife and kids back home. And that's just, and now as a dad of two young boys, like, I appreciate that intuitively so much more than I did not appreciate it as a lieutenant. So I would, that's probably one thing that I had a huge blind spot looking back on. Thankfully, I think I had some NCOs that probably protected my soldiers from my overzealousness more than anything else. But I think that is very hard thing to have perspective on when you're lieutenant.
Yeah.
And Yeah, no, the other thing I would probably tell myself is to just um, you know, uh, don't be afraid to, like, ask for help
Yeah.
and go out when you're transitioning. I think I was, like, more worried than I needed to be about the transition because I was a little reticent about asking for help. And you know, I think that's just something, people want to help you.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, great advice. We didn't even get to talk much about your going into the startup, but I think I'll follow up with you in a year because that's another thing I talk to a lot of veterans, especially when they're coming out of those MBA schools. They're going into startups. I'd be curious to hear what your startup experience was like and where you're at. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Thanks for your service and thanks for continuing to serve and mentor and be part of that network for the the Rangers and the service members coming out of service. So thanks for coming on and appreciate it.
Thank you, Yuma. Thanks for doing this.